Hey there folks, how's it going? Today I would like to share with you what I consider to be one of the most essential classic Scruggs licks out there. It's the lick you just heard, the one I played at the beginning of this video, and it's sometimes known as the Six White Horses lick. If you go check out a recording of a song called Six White Horses by Flatt and Scruggs, you'll hear at the beginning that's what Earl comes in with. But that's not the only place he plays it. He actually played that lick all over the place. And besides just sounding really cool, it's a great lick to learn for a couple reasons. If you're more on the beginner end of things, this is still accessible to you, but it's going to be an entrance into some other techniques like single string that you might not have seen yet. And this is a great way to get into it because you can learn those techniques and still use it within the classic Scruggs style. If you're a little more experienced, then it's still great to learn because it's kind of essential in the Scruggs style, but it's also really versatile and there's a bunch of different ways you can play it. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to play this lick, when you would want to play this lick, and then I'll show you a couple variations and some ways you can think about this lick to make up your own licks in the future. So let's just start by talking about how to play this lick. I'll show you a close-up view of the lick and then we'll do a little walkthrough. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do to play this lick is get your hand in this G chord shape right here. Now, if you're not familiar with this shape, then you can check out a link in the description of this video, which is going to show you how to play this shape, as well as another one, in a style of backup called vamping. It's a really classic style of backup you would play in Scruggs style, and it uses this shape, and it actually goes really well with this lick. And to start, we're just going to play that fourth string and first string, one after another. Next, we're going to move to the third string and play frets 3 and 4, and we're going to use our thumb and index on that same string on our right hand. Then we're going to move to the second string, and we're going to play frets 3 and 5. Again, thumb and index on the right hand. Then we're going to go right back to the third string, same thing we were doing before, frets 3 and 4, and then it ends back on the fourth string, 5th fret, with your thumb. So, all together we have... And once you speed up, it sounds like this. And when people play this lick, usually they'll give it a little bit of a bounce or a swing feel. And that's the lick. By the way, folks, if you're looking for tablature for every single example in this video, you can find that at patreon.com/EliGilbertBanjo. That's where I post all the tablature for all of my lessons, a bunch of bonus content. It's also a great way to support the work that I'm doing here. So I'll leave a link in the description of this video where you can go find that. Anyway, back to the lesson. Now, this might be kind of new to you if you're used to playing things based out of roll patterns or even melodic style, but that's because technically this is single string. Single string meaning playing consecutive notes on the same string, which is unusual if you're playing out of rolls or melodic style. It's just not something that happens as frequently. But with single string, that's the whole name of the game. A lick like this doesn't really sound too much like something that, for instance, Don Reno would have played, who's really known for single string, who would play things more like... But this is technically still single string. We're playing consecutive notes on the same string. And as a result, the technique that you've built from practicing other things may not directly apply to this. So it's worth practicing this in a new way in order to actually address the different techniques used for this lick or other licks like this. So if you want to get really good at this lick or licks like this, then you have to practice the thing about it that's new. And if you're not used to playing single string, then it's that alternating thumb index on the same string that's new to you. So you can either practice that by just playing the lick itself. You can play it really slowly and carefully, build up speed, get more comfortable with it. You should absolutely do that. But you can also just focus on the single string aspect, which is the thumb and index alternating, and you can just put that on one string at a time like this. You can do that with a metronome, you can do it on all the different strings, different combinations, but that'll get you a lot more comfortable with that aspect of the lick, so then when you apply it, it's a lot more comfortable in general. Now there's a couple really cool variations of that lick that I'm going to show you, but first let's just talk about when you would actually play this. You can go check out the recording of Six White Horses, which is one of the early examples of this lick being used, and Earl just repeats it a bunch of times as the intro of a song, which is great, but it can actually be used all over a bunch of different songs in backup or in your solos, anything like that. The most common way that this lick gets used is as a substitution for one measure of vamping backup. So if you've already watched my video, or maybe you just already understand this concept, vamping sounds like this. So you're just going to substitute one of those measures for this lick. It also works great for the position shifting version of that vamping backup, which is basically the same, you're just including another chord shape at the top here. And just generally anywhere that you might be playing a closed position of this shape, you can play that lick, which also means you can apply this exact lick with this exact shape anywhere on the fretboard and it'll work just the same, which means you can use it over any major chord. So then as an example, we can move up here to our C chord, same shape, but up here it's a C, and if we play that lick, then it works great over a C chord. If we move up here to our D chord, play the same lick, works great for a D chord. If you're playing a song that includes all of those chords, G, C, and D, which so many songs do, then you could play this a little bit on each of those chords. Here's an example of that 1, 4, 5, 1 progression, and at some point during those chords, I will play that lick over each of them. So keep that in mind, that anywhere you can play this chord shape, you can play that lick and it'll sound great. And if that's all new to you, then great, you've got a bunch of stuff to work on. But if that's already something you're familiar with, then let's get into some other ways you can play licks that sound like this, or you can come up with your own licks that sound kind of like this. We'll first start with just a couple variations on this lick, and I'll move a little faster through these, but they work the same way, they take just about the same amount of time, and they fit in the same places, but they all sound a little different, so there's a little bit of a different use for each one. The first of these is nearly identical to the original lick, it just includes a double stop. Earl played it all the time. I use them basically interchangeably. Now this one is, again, basically identical to the original lick. There's only one note that's different, but it's one that I hear people play once in a while, so it's worth playing. It's at least worth just putting that note in a different place for the technique aspect. It's going to require you to play 3 notes on the same string, which is something we haven't done yet. So here's another version of it. This next one is a bluesier take on the same lick, and it includes a bend on the 3rd string. This next version takes that bluesiness to the next level, and it actually spills over the bar line just a little bit. And this next one, I wouldn't even say is necessarily a version of that original lick. Maybe it came from there. It just uses a similar position, and it's one I like a lot. It is the hardest one out of all of them. It's one that I learned listening to Don Reno, and it's got a triplet in there, and it's got a couple extra notes that you don't find in the original lick. So something a little out there, but if you're feeling adventurous, then try this one. And finally, here is a version that's going to work in 3/4. Everything we've been doing so far works in 4/4, which is where this lick is usually found, but there is a way to play it, or at least make it fit into 3/4. And that's to skip the first beat, which means we just start on the 3rd string and play this. That's all 3 beats, and that's how it works. You'll hear it now in context in a way that's going to make a lot more sense. Now, learning all of those variations and using them is a great way to expand your vocabulary, improve your technique, and also build your bluegrass banjo language. But it's also worth just looking into all the similarities and differences between them and see if you can try to speak that language without playing exactly one of these licks. You might have noticed that so far we're really not talking about music theory all that much. I have lessons about music theory, I know a lot of music theory, I sometimes think about things in terms of music theory, but it's not always the most helpful way to understand how to use something to make music. And in this case, I don't think we really have to talk about music theory. For instance, all we really know is that we have this G chord shape. The notes in a G chord are G, B, D, and the lick we're playing has some other notes. We don't really need to know what they are. We don't need to call that a scale. We can just think of it as I'm playing a G chord and these other notes are available to make sounds that sound like that lick. Now, in a way, that is music theory. It's just ways to talk about music. But I do think that sometimes limiting the words that we use can help you just focus on the music more than the words. You don't have to think about just the words, but it is something we get stuck in if we start talking about it a lot. So when I think about improvising using a shape like this or a lick like this, I'm not generally thinking about music theory. I might have thought about it in the past, maybe tried to find some rational reason why certain things work a certain way, and maybe that's a good explanation. But the thing that actually helps me make music out of these shapes is just to think about what notes I've been using. We're not going to talk about a real scale here, but if I wanted to, I could take all the notes that I use in all of those licks, combine them all into a scale, and here's what I would end up with. Now that's kind of interesting. It sounds a little bit like a scale. It's not really a scale or not one that has a name necessarily, but it's got a certain sound to it. It actually lends itself to sounding like a lick in itself. So it's kind of got a blues scale in there, it's got a major chord in there, but really what we have is not a scale. And if I just kind of keep the sound of those licks in my head, then I think I'm going to do a better job of making more music out of this than if I just went up and down. Because this, again, that sounds like a scale. That doesn't really sound like one of these licks. But if I take these licks as my inspiration, I can actually come up with something that sounds a little bit more like these licks and more like the music that I'm trying to make. So if you're looking for some ways to stretch this material a little further or just start improvising with this material, then try taking what you already know about these licks and see if you can just mix them up a little bit. If I start with this version of the lick, it's got the double stop in there here. Well, knowing what I know, I've got some other notes available to me. I could try something like... Right hand is exactly the same. I'm playing a double stop in the same place, but it's this instead of this. To me, that sounds just as valid. It's a little more bluesy, and it takes up the same amount of time. And I just came up with it myself. I'm sure plenty of people have played that before, but I did that just using the information I have from these licks, not these are the notes in the scale, not this is the order they're supposed to go in. It just sounds right. And if it sounds right, it is right. Here's another example. Let's say I started with this Don Reno lick like this. It's a great lick, sounds pretty major for the most part. Well, again, if I wanted to introduce some of those more bluesy notes, like for instance, this one, or maybe the bend that I had, then I could try this. Now, I didn't just come up with that like right on the fly that second. I actually did like 10 seconds ago as I was trying to figure out what to use as an example, but it didn't take that long to figure out. And just because I've been messing around with this stuff for years, it's a little easier to come by. But once you start messing with it, it gets a lot easier and you start hearing the connection between all of these notes. And hearing that stuff is way more useful and important than understanding it. There's value in understanding it, certainly, but you actually don't need to understand it in order to hear it and use it and make that music. So both sides of the spectrum are totally valid, but in this case, you just don't need the music theory to get a lot of value out of something as cool as one simple lick. So folks, I hope you found that helpful. If you're interested in the tablature for all of the examples in this video and all my other videos, go ahead and check out Patreon. Feel free to subscribe to this channel, like this video, all of that stuff, but that's gonna do it for this one. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.